So with that comes the wonderful man to present tonight. Fabulous man. You know, you have a MS, I guess, in biology and
Developmental biology, molecular biology.
in developmental biology and molecular biology. Thank you. And he's made a study of aging since 2002, at least. Okay? So
Thank you.
here, John. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lori, for that very fine introduction. I'll be introducing you maybe to some things that you're familiar with or things you're not familiar with. My talk won't be essentially complete because we're always learning new things and the list could get very long and boring. So I'm trying to highlight important things. But if I'm not clear and you want me to repeat something, please ask me to. I'll be happy to. And I want to recognize two distinguished guests in the front row. Paul Spiegel is an attorney in San Francisco that represents various new biotech companies. And if you have legal questions, he may be able to help you. And Johnny Adams here is the CEO of the Aging Intervention Foundation in Southern California. And he's also the moderator of the Los Angeles Gerontology Research Group, which is a online discussion group of scientists and lay people. And he may be able to tell you how to sign into that and take part in those discussions as well. Do you have anything you want to add before I get started?
Don't mic. You're miking.
You need the mic closer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. There are guys around with 2 or 3 PhDs. John knows more practical stuff than all of them.
Is this on mic enough?
A little bit more.
Bring it closer.
There you go. Yeah. That'll work.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
All right. So I'll go through this. If you have questions while I'm going through, just raise your hand or ask me to stop or repeat, and we'll try it. Let me start with some disclaimers and caveats. I'm not a medical doctor. I do research, and I study the research of other scientists. My company, Legendary Pharmaceuticals, is not a big pharmaceutical company. It's my small consulting company. I will be talking about experiments. If you choose to experiment with yourself, please educate yourselves first. We do not accept liability for your experiments. So, it's imperative to improve health span and longevity. And how many of you have heard the term health span? So, lifespan is how long do you live? Health span is how long do you stay healthy? And we would like to stay healthy as long as possible. So we want to improve our health span. And we want to help science develop new interventions for health in later life. So I'm going to talk about some of the intervention opportunities. Of course, there are some rather safe ones, and then there are some more experimental ones. Some of the rather safe ones are daily exercise. And you don't have to do every kind of exercise every day, but a couple times a week do resistance, which means weights or elastic bands or push-ups or pull-ups, those sorts of things. They not only build muscle, but they put hormones into your bloodstream, which rejuvenates your other organs. Aerobic exercise is something like bicycling, swimming, running, anything that makes you breathe hard. And sometimes resistance can be aerobic, and sometimes aerobic can be resistance, like bicycling. And finally, yoga helps you to stretch your joints and loosen up and preserve your flexibility with age. Avoid harmful foods, and different people have different ideas of what's harmful. I myself eat a mainly plant-based diet, occasionally some salmon. I have met other people at some of the health conferences who say, we want to be keto and we'll only eat meat. And I think that's terrible, but I'll let them defend themselves if you talk to them. We all have stem cells, and stem cells are cells which can repopulate other cells which might die off with time. And older people have fewer stem cells than younger people. Babies have quite a lot. And in older people, the stem cells are mainly residing inside the hip bone. And we can go to, and I'll tell you about a company later that is able to, under local anesthesia, drill a small hole in the hip bone and suck out some stem cells and put it in liquid nitrogen for future use, so that if you should need your own stem cells later, you can have a younger version of your stem cells that may be very helpful to you. If you are having babies or grandchildren, you can bank your baby's placenta in liquid nitrogen and their cord blood in liquid nitrogen for their later use. There are a few-
Placenta and cord blood are the two things you're banking?
Yes. Mhm.
And your own stem cells, right?
I covered that, yes.
Right.
So, there are a few prescription drugs which can be repurposed. The first one is called Metformin, which has been around so long that it's generic and very inexpensive. All of these prescription drugs do require a doctor's prescription, and hopefully you have a doctor with whom you have good rapport. If you don't, you might want to shop around for a second doctor. Metformin has been on the market for decades as a diabetic drug, and what scientists discovered when they looked at the historical data, are you getting my sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. When they looked at the historical data, they found that normally diabetics would have poorer health than non-diabetics, but the diabetics that were on metformin had less cancer, less Alzheimer's, and less heart disease than non-diabetics who weren't on metformin. So there is now, under the aegis of the Albert Einstein University in Manhattan and Bronx, a clinical trial starting up. It's going to test metformin in non-diabetics, and they're going to follow them for 6 years. And these are older people, and they're going to see whether their incidences of cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's disease is lower. And we don't have to wait 6 years. We could try it out now if we're feeling experimental. But if you're feeling cautious, I don't want to encourage anybody to do something they're not comfortable with. Rapamycin has been used for some time now as it's an approved drug for avoiding rejection of transplants. But there is some research now going on in mice and to a limited extent in dogs and to an even more limited extent in people, testing whether rapamycin can slow down the development of aging-related diseases. And there's a pathway here called mTOR, and rapamycin seems to slow down the mTOR pathway. mTOR is also something that gets slowed down by fasting or limited fasting, like partial day fasting, and exercise. All of these things work similar to rapamycin, so you don't really need rapamycin if you're exercising and partial day fasting. Some people want to take drugs rather than do hard stuff, but I think exercise has a lot of benefits. Just this week at the American Aging Association meeting, we heard about HIV drugs being helpful to reverse some of the genetic damage that occurs with aging. This genetic damage is sometimes called jumping genes or line 1 elements, but they use the retroviral pathway that HIV uses. So there's some experiments going on. It's very early stage, using HIV drugs to prevent this line 1 genetic damage from taking place.
John, is there a name of which HIV drugs we're talking about? I mean, aren't there a wide variety of HIV
Yeah,
drugs?
the antiretrovirals, and I will look up my notes. As I say, I just learned about it at the meeting this week. I'll look up my notes at the end of the talk and let you know which ones they are.
Thank you.
Dasatinib is a prescription drug which is used in combination with a nutritional supplement called quercetin, and the two together have been found to help to delete what are called senescent cells, cells that cause inflammation that chronically increases with age, and it requires a prescription unless you're getting it from some non-prescription source, but normally it does require a prescription. And sometimes it's hard to convince doctors who aren't aware of these things to write you a prescription. But I'll be talking a little bit about how you can find access to some of these things in a bit. NAD plus is a variation on vitamin B3 niacin, and we see as we get older the amount of NAD plus in our body goes down dramatically, and it's important for our cells to make energy. So very old people who lack both the energy in the physical fitness sense and lack the energy to keep their cells healthy can benefit from NAD plus infusions and some dietary supplements that I'll talk about in a minute. Finally, I think I mentioned banking your baby's placenta in cord blood. Some of the experimental drugs that are not yet approved by the FDA, they're still being tested mainly in mice or in clinical trials. Elenopetide, also known as SS31 from Stealth Pharmaceuticals, that's a clever name.
Stealth?
Stealth.
Stealth?
Stealth.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's, this helps to keep the mitochondria, the energy centers in the cells, healthy. They're doing quite a bit of experimental work now, and they already have it in clinical trials. How many of you are not familiar with what clinical trials means? Everybody knows. Clinical trials means people. Preclinical means mice and dogs and rats and monkeys and so forth. So, yeah, elenopetide is in clinical trials now, which means they're testing its safety on people. They're looking at things like improving the health of the retinas and things like that. I mentioned rapamycin earlier. There are a couple of big pharmaceutical companies that realize that rapamycin is off patent, so they're making
They're
a lot
off what?
of off patent.
Off patent.
So they're making versions by modifying the molecular structure slightly, and by modifying the molecular structure, first of all, they can get 17 years of patent protection, but second of all, they cross the blood-brain barrier better because of the modification. So they actually are somewhat better, fewer side effects, and more efficacy than old-fashioned rapamycin. And I mentioned the HIV drugs, which I'll look up at the end of the talk. Aligebrium got partway through clinical trials, and the company sponsoring it ran out of money. So it's now sort of an orphan, not quite drug, but it's quite safe, in my opinion. I've been taking it for 18 years. It's a modified form of vitamin B1, and it helps to dissolve the crosslinks that make our arteries stiffer and our capillaries stiffer and our collagen stiffer and all of these things, and reduce inflammation caused by the sugar that sticks to collagen outside of the cells. And Lori mentioned this, that's in your handout, talks a little bit about it. It's called glycation is the process, and Aligebrium or ALT-711 is the experimental drug that treats it. Yes?
Everything you've mentioned so far is a pharmaceutical, and my belief is that pharmaceuticals toxic. To
Some of them
one-
are.
Yeah, I think they all are. I mean,
That's
far-
quite a sweeping
It
generalization.
is, and I probably have overstepped myself with that one. But I'm just shocked, actually, that you're recommending pharmaceuticals.
I'm presenting evidence, I'm not recommending anything.
I see. I'm sorry, I did say that wrong.
You're shocked that they would have any benefits.
I'm sure they do have some benefits,
Mhm.
but the side effects are legendary.
Yes, well, some
some
drugs
things.
have worse side effects than others. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, you're specifically working with the ones that have the least harm associated with them, is my memory of, all the years you've been doing this.
Well, I'm presenting evidence on new things that are still in testing, and some of them we don't know are side effects.
Thank you.
But I thought you'd want to know about what's being tested and what seems to be good for mice and monkeys and dogs and things like that.
Or you, I mean, you're obviously you're testing it too.
Well, I'm testing the Allogebrium and the PBT too, but some of these other things I haven't started taking yet except for Metformin. But I'm looking more and more closely at taking some of these other ones because I think maybe a whole spectrum of things will cover more of these aging pathways than just one single thing. So PBT2 is a quinoline derivative, somewhat like the natural product curcumin. And PBT2 works in the brain to help clear out the amyloid beta that you may have heard about that's one of the causes of Alzheimer's disease. So we have been able to work with a pharmaceutical manufacturer to get a batch made for ourselves, even though it's only experimental and not yet approved. And I don't encourage anybody to take anything unapproved unless they have checked it out themselves and decided that that's what they want to do. Finally, there's some experiments going on with young plasma or extracellular vesicle infusion. And once again, this is highly experimental. Well, to some extent, plasma infusions are standard medicine. The FDA already has been allowing this for 20 or 30 years, but using it as a way of turning back the clock is still experimental. And if you get it from a shady source, you may be exposing yourself to diseases, so you want to be very careful about where you get it.
What's EV stand for again?
Extracellular vesicles. So if you filter some plasma and just save they're little tiny things 1,000 times smaller than a cell, and they contain some proteins and some RNA, which seems to have beneficial effects. So some people would rather get a small injection of these concentrated extracellular vesicles rather than sit in a chair for 2 hours getting a bag of intravenous plasma inserted in them. And there's less chance that way of having too much volume. There was a company a while back that was giving very large doses of plasma, and if it had the risk of putting too much volume in your blood vessels and causing damage to the lungs. So you want to make sure that whoever's working with you knows what they're doing and is very cautious.
Keith Richards has famously extended his life way beyond where he should be. With
He's only
lots
a
of,
couple of years older than me, so I don't know that I just.
except the way he's lived, he's had about 200,000 miles,
But I did hear him on a Fresh Air interview saying that the idea that he's receiving young blood is a fantasy made up by one of the fan magazines.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't talked to him personally, but if you can introduce me, I'll. So supplements are things that are already on the market that you can buy it.
I do know that he definitely goes to Switzerland and has his blood run through things.
You've read this or you talked
Run
to
through
him?
things.
Because he told Terry Gross on Fresh Air that this was a myth.
Well, it's not that they're replacing his blood with somebody else's, but they are treating his blood.
He said that this was untrue.
He's getting any blood treatments at all?
That's what he said on Fresh Air 2
Okay,
years ago.
okay.
Who's he talking about?
Keith Richards.
A Rolling Stone, one of the fan magazines a few years ago said that he was getting young blood.
I think they're just looking for reasons to explain why he didn't die a long time ago.
So, one of the dietary supplements are things you can buy over the counter at Whole Foods or by mail order from Amazon, or VitaCost is a good one. And Swanson is another good one for online purchases at reasonable cost. So us older folks need about 5,000 international units of vitamin D3 per day. Younger 20-year-olds only need 400. So our absorption ability goes down with age, and we have to keep increasing how much we take as we get. I'm 67, by the way. Yes?
Do you recommend that it be taken during the nighttime or during the day, or does it matter?
My considered opinion is that dietary supplements should be taken with food, because that's when your body is absorbing things.
Okay, great, thank you.
NMN is a dietary supplement that increases the NAD plus that I was talking about.
What is its full name?
Nicotinamide mononucleotide.
Oh, right.
It's closely related to vitamin B3, but it's much more expensive.
Ooh, that sounded.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that word, expensive.
And is there a balance at one day?
When you find it online, the bottle will tell you take 1 capsule a day or something like that. Coenzyme Q10 is particularly important if you're taking statins, because statins can have side effects on your muscles. But just as a general dietary supplement, I take 100 milligrams a day. It turns out that old-fashioned Chinese or Indian green tea or white tea or black tea or coffee all have beneficial plant compounds called polyphenols. And it also turns out that the green tea, white tea, and black tea come from the same plant. They're just processed differently, whether they're sun-dried or stuck in a can with no air for 6 months or whatever. And each of these different processes gives them a different collection of polyphenols. So I try to take a cup of each of these every day because I think that I'm getting more benefits. And while I'm on the subject of polyphenols, that's a class of chemicals that absorb light and absorb free radicals. And so all of the colored fruits and vegetables have different combinations of polyphenols, such as blueberries and strawberries and raspberries and carrots and pomegranates. They all contain combinations of polyphenols that help to absorb free radicals that could cause damage to our cells. So one of the researchers at the Department of Agriculture Nutrition Information Service at Tufts University wrote a book called The Color Code, and his slogan was "Eat a rainbow every day." And another expert in this field said, in general, avoid anything white. Avoid white bread, avoid white rice, and stay with colored fruits and vegetables for the most part. There is a mushroom called lion's mane, and you can buy the extract of this mushroom online from, what's the name of the company?
Well, fungi perfecti is
Fungi
for micromedicinals.
Yeah.
Fungi perfecti,
Yes,
okay.
they're out of Washington.
Stannis is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, if you Google lion's mane and Paul Stamets, or just And that's Washington State, not Washington DC.
Like, if you-
Question?
No, not a question, just a comment. If you know what you're looking for, they grow right around here.
Face the camera.
I'm sorry. If you know what you're looking for, lion's mane mushrooms grow right around here. I picked a really nice one not long
Really?
ago off the tree in West Marin.
Oh.
Yeah, but you have to know what you're doing.
Wow.
Or you'd be dead.
Yeah, if you eat the wrong wild mushroom, you can poison your liver and die an awful death in 3 days. So talk to Paul, he's the lawyer.
I'd like to mention that Kevin's, Kevin, this guy Kevin, the owner of Kevin's Green Jeans, he runs foraging mushroom hikes, which also include finding psilocybin.
Oh my God.
No, it doesn't talk about that part, but they are actually some of the best psilocybin mushrooms grown around.
And they actually grow in Golden Gate Park, not far from the carousel.
Oh, okay.
Police station too.
How funny.
Okay, I hadn't intended to talk about psilocybin, but it is being studied at Johns Hopkins as a treatment for PTSD and for terminal cancer patients to better come to grips with their coming demise. So that's, I guess, all I have to say about psilocybin at the moment. So if you're considering self-experimentation, whether you're young or old makes a difference, because older folks may have less time if they do nothing, and they may benefit more from rejuvenative therapies. If you're 25 years old, you don't really need to rejuvenate. On the other hand, older folks may be so frail that some of these experimental therapies may be hard on them. So once again, educate yourselves, because this is still experimental and not yet FDA approved. So I have been studying this for many years, and as I learn new things, talking to scientists, reading their research papers that I get from the library or PubMed or Google Scholar, and not the National Enquirer, I have put together this flowchart, the causal pathways of aging, and I'll briefly show you.
Can you buy it that size if you want, from you?
Yes, you can. It's about $100
Well, that could
to
be
have
very
it printed
valuable
out this
for somebody.
large. A little bit smaller, 3 by 4 feet, is $50. Or you can download the PDF at this website and go to your favorite printer, but you probably won't
But
save
they
it.
could get this big if they buy it from you, right?
Yes. Mhm. So there are 3 regions in this chart, and at the top are chemical reactions that happen inside the cell, and genetics happen in the nucleus, and energy happens in the mitochondria, and recycling happens in the lysosome and the macro autophagosome. And this is chemical reactions that happen in blood plasma or in the collagen. And I mentioned collagen earlier because when it gets stiff, your blood pressure goes up. And when it gets stiff, your fingers get numb. And it's a worse problem for diabetics because they have more sugar in their blood.
So John, just for everybody, could you define a lysosome and an autophagosome? You just mentioned them, so
Yes,
some
I'm-
people probably don't know what it means.
I'm going to.
Oh, okay,
I have a
good.
picture of a cell.
Oh, okay, wonderful.
But I just wanted to guide you quickly
Okay,
through the
sure.
chart. This part of the chart talks about whole populations of cells. Oh, are you leaving?
I am.
Very nice to meet you.
Oh, well, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
This part of the chart governs populations of cells, like birth and death of brain cells or muscle cells, for example. And this part of the chart governs diseases of old age that can descend from these chemical reactions that affect these populations of cells, which then cause these diseases of old age. And we'll have a mixer after the talk, and you can come and take a closer look at this, or download it, or buy the chart and enjoy it on your wall. A surprising number of research institutes and professors now have it on the walls of their halls.
Yep.
They're using it for a couple of reasons. One is to provide guidance to their students in how everything fits together and what to study. And they also use it to jog their own memories, because this is an awful lot to try and keep in your own brain without referring to it. So they use it for reference as well. And then on the sides, we have either environmental factors, or drugs, or supplements, or lifestyle choices that point in to the molecular targets that they affect. So it's everything from the drugs and supplements that I talked about to exercise and getting enough sleep and partial day fasting. So anyway, we
John,
can
can I
talk.
just
Yeah.
ask you a quick question? So you've been studying this for years, obviously, to be able to pull this all together, and I'm just curious as to how much the external factors and the chemical toxicity and the pharmaceuticals and all have actually accelerated the deterioration of our bodies, all the while we're coming up with sort of new remedies. I mean, it feels like it's sort of this odd balance, but that the destruction factors, you know, we're living longer on the one hand, but we're kind of kept alive by these crazy drugs, or some people are.
Well, there's sometimes a sweet spot in a lot of these things. Like without any sugar at all, we'd be dead, because our
Right.
brains wouldn't be able to keep functioning.
Right.
But with too much sugar, we'll be stiff and our hearts may stop functioning.
Right.
Is that the sort of question you?
So that's the, when you say that's the sweet spot, what you're finding is that there are some breakthroughs or some, you know, some real,
Yes,
is there
dose.
hope? Is there hope actually that we're,
Yes,
Yeah.
dose is very important. And since they're experimental, we're still figuring out optimal doses, and it varies from person to person, and a 300-pound person trying to lose weight is going to need to prioritize different things than a 120-pound person who exercises every day.
sure.
I think it's important to also point out just now with sugar, for the most part, it's also a main carrier of glyphosate. And so we do have this, glyphosate is pretty much in everything now, and but it's really in sugar, and so that's also kind of affecting all of us. And
Well, I'm not
it
here to
affects the
talk about,
mitochondria.
I'm not here to talk about glyphosate, I'm talking about aging. So.
Yeah.
But sugar is a very major factor in
Well, and
aging.
glyphosate is affecting aging in this country.
And it's one product that is heavily sprayed, that's true, as is wheat, as is beer, barley, as is corn, as is, you know, I mean,
It's in all of them,
it's
yeah.
definitely an important factor. I would like to mention something about the CoQ10.
Yes?
Talking about tests to empower yourself and understand yourself, if you can get at lifeextension.com, you can order your own CoQ10 test. Like for instance, I don't do 100 milligrams, I do 300. And CoQ10 levels are very related to the or age level of our heart and our brain. And then also I can get for cheapo vitamin D testing, okay? And
That's very
and-
important. Some
and-
people have, their vitamin D levels are too low, some people have enough, and you don't really need to take more if you've got enough.
And most people don't go too high, but if you go too high, you can get atrial fibrillation. If you go too low, you can get a host of horrible things. You know, like you can be much more subject to cancer and other immune system issues. So I'm just saying, from this level of understanding yourself, go to lifeextension.com, start understanding, and they will tell you your range and what is the range for normal, okay? So,
Good advice.
what?
That's good advice.
Yeah, and you don't
get
have
tested.
to pay some doctor to monitor yourself. And then they'll tell you, you know, and then one other very nice thing is if you go to lifeextension.com and you order tests, they will have a very highly educated health counselor talk to you for free
Nice.
about every single variable in your testing. So you can become the empowered patient, and boy, when you go talk to a doctor, like my experience, the doctors are a little overwhelmed by how I come across, but they also learn, and they're very happy for that, ultimately, if they're open-minded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, John,
Yeah.
I know this didn't just pop off yesterday.
No,
This has
right.
been
Years.
evolved as more research, and you're constantly going to conferences
Yes.
and reading.
Right.
Mhm.
And this has evolved as more information has
Yes.
become available.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yes.
It's a work in progress.
Well-
I made the first draft in the year 2000,
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing.
How many drafts have you done?
about every 6 months.
And John, you know, when you come up and you look at these close, I mean, you see everything in here. Cross-link breakers, which is like one particular substance, drugs, you know, experimental. Also meditation, sleep, every single thing is on here, you know, everything you could imagine. So I probably will, I'm probably gonna spend $100 to get your turn. I have to figure where to put it though.
Exactly, on the ceiling.
Right,
On the
yeah.
ceiling.
Yeah, over your bed.
Build a new wall.
John, how much different is this 2019 model versus 2018?
I've added about
If we
5
do
new
it the
pathways.
same.
About 5,
Yeah,
that's all? Oh, okay.
I mean,
Well,
some of
that
the
is
basics
pretty
of
advanced
aging
then.
we've known about for a long time.
Okay.
And the other thing that I just wanted to point out is it's not all due to glyphosate. People didn't live forever 2,000 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I can
aging
say that, thank
aging
you.
has been going on ever since there were people. Yeah.
John, I haven't read it, but I've seen the headline that the World Health Organization just came out with some huge report about dementia and sort of how it's just imploding, you know, worldwide.
Exploding.
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 Exploding. So is there a reason for that?
Yes,
Yes.
because people are living longer, but Alzheimer's disease has not been cured yet. That's one reason we're very interested in metformin, exercise, partial day fasting. All of these things can postpone Alzheimer's disease.
What was the third? I'm sorry, I know exercising, partial day fasting. What was the third?
Metformin is that old diabetes drug that
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah,
being
that's right, you mentioned.
experimented with to reduce the incidence of Alzheimer's.
And that you've been taking, you're saying,
I just started in January.
in January.
I'm kind of conservative.
John, I want to mention these things, which we both learned about at the anti-aging conference.
Okay, while she talks about this, I'm gonna use the restroom.
Okay, great. So, John and I have been going to A4M together at different times. And,
A4M is the
the
anti-aging.
anti-aging medicine conference, and they explain things in a way that I could understand it, but it did take me a year or two to get terms together. And when I'm there, and if I'm studying, I make sure I'm on the internet, so if there's a phrase that I don't understand, I look it up. But what I want to tell you about is I was very impressed by, at the Institute for Integrative Medicine. and
It's upside down.
What?
It's the box is upside down.
Upside down.
Oh. For mental health, I learned about low-dose lithium that breaks up tau and amyloid plaques, which are what help create Alzheimer's. And this was presented in a conference on mental health and by a psychiatrist, recommending that everybody over 50 be taking this. And it is very well validated by a lot of research, and I did print out one article for you guys.
And have you taken it?
What?
Are you taking it?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I don't have symptoms like senior moments. I have to say I also attribute that to taking bioidentical hormones in the right amount. When I turned 50, and I'm 68 now, but when I turned 50, I read Menopause in Your Mind. And I saw a neuron grown in an estrogen deficient environment versus an estrogen enriched environment. And in an estrogen enriched environment, if you looked at the total synapses in the cells, you would see something like this. If you looked at the neuron, and you can look this right up on Google, if you look at a cell grown in an estrogen deficient environment, it's like this, all right? And this is one of the reasons why women are more prone to Alzheimer's than men. And one of the things that men do, because I've studied a lot about hormones, is they convert testosterone as they age into estrogen. Okay, and some of that is good, some of that can give them benign prostatic enlargement and even contribute to prostate cancer, but a certain amount is great for the brain. Estrogen and the brain, whether male or female, are in love with each other, okay? And so the thing that I learned about most recently in the last anti-aging conference was a certain brand of cat's claw, which is also used in Lyme disease, but it also dissolves amyloid plaque. And the research was very exciting and well substantiated in the presentation. And then this is Perceptive Professional, which is stronger, but if you don't mind taking more pills, you can order Perceptive right on Amazon of this specific cat's claw. And some of the other cat's claws did not have this effect. So it's an herb, by the way. So anyway, these are all useful, so I forgot to mention them, and they're easy to take, okay? Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Mhm.
Can we talk about that for a minute? Estrogen for men. What's
Well, I can.
what's the benefit of that, or what's,
Don't take estrogen.
okay, so there is no
No,
benefit.
if you're a man, since you're contributing as you're aging, you're converting some of your testosterone into estrogen. Do not take estrogen supplementation. If you're a woman, I highly recommend it, all right? For several reasons, including your bone strength and your vaginal health. But with respect to men, they started giving men things called aromatase inhibitors to get them to stop converting to estrogen in some cases, and that was also found to be a problem. Men need a certain amount of estrogen, not nothing, okay? And that was a big thing that came out in anti-aging research. A man has more libido, actually, if he does not have too low estrogen, and also ejaculates more easily or better. So anyway, these are a few things, but most men are, if anything, they'll be a little high in estrogen as they get older. Hi, yeah.
Oh, well, I went through a period or a self-experiment where I was eating a lot of soybeans, soy milk, tofu, and
Stand
a lot
up.
of other stuff.
Stand up.
Oh, okay, a lot of soy. So I went for the lab work, and my estradiol, which you endocrinologists here, I guess that's a form of estrogen, went way too high, not good. So I cut out the soy. And we do not care for the feminizing effects of too much estrogen.
Very
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
But men who are running higher in estrogen will tend to develop breasts, male breasts, weight gain, enlarged prostate, you know, and ways to build your testosterone can include resistance training, actually, among other things. And also foreplay can increase testosterone secretion, it does. so. Anyway, so I guess that's enough for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. My pleasure.
Okay, so I thought I should define a few terms, although maybe some of you intuitively know the definition, but some people use the word senescence, some people use the word aging. So aging is a process, and senescence is what you get if you age badly. Aging takes a long time, so we're not looking at what changes in 2 hours after you take some kind of supplement. We're looking at what changes over 10 or 20 years. And during aging, some cells are growing and dividing, and some cells are dying off. There is constant production and erosion of bone by 2 different cell types in the bones. And there's constant production and recycling of the collagen. And collagen is important because without it we'd be a pool of cells in a bucket on the floor. Collagen is what gives us strength and structure to our bodies. It includes cartilage, it includes the matrix of bone, and it includes the strengthening fibers around the aorta that keep the aorta from blowing out. Let's see, with age, there is some change in the size and shape of organs, and accumulations and losses of various things, particularly things stored in the bones. I talked a little bit about the network chart already, but these things coming in from the side are either detrimental or helpful things that may affect various targets inside. So by understanding this network better, it gives us a better idea of what future therapies to test and try and develop new therapies that might be beneficial for us. Jan?
Is there a database behind your chart that is being rendered visually, or how, is that?
If you want to go into the background of any of these particular pathways, the best answer is to look at the keywords in the box and look it up on PubMed or Google Scholar.
Okay.
Because papers are always updating, and if I were to put
Right.
down a bibliography last
Right.
year, some of it wouldn't be as up to date.
Right, so this is references to sources on particular topics, basically,
Yes,
rather than specific
there's
articles.
keywords. There's
It's all,
keywords.
it's all keywords, oh, okay. Got
Yeah.
it. Great.
So, good targets should have strong therapeutic leverage and should be accessible to the interventions. So there are different challenges for interventions in 4 broad categories. Dividing cells. Some cells divide too much, which are become cancerous. Some cells don't renew fast enough, and you could end up with shriveling up of certain organs. Then there are cells that aren't even supposed to divide, such as your heart muscle. Your heart muscle doesn't divide, your brain neurons don't divide, so we have to keep them healthy for a lifetime. There are some stem cells in the heart and some stem cells in the brain, but for the most part, these cells just live as long as we do. Then there's what I refer to as the extracellular matrix, which is the collagen, as well as the plasma in the blood. The blood is about 50% cells and 50% liquid, and the liquid is called plasma. Yeah.
What do you know about the regeneration of nerve cells?
If you cut a peripheral nerve, it takes about 1 month per centimeter to grow back. So it can take quite a while before, if it was a sensory nerve in your arm, it could be a while, maybe a year or more of numbness before it eventually grows back. Oftentimes there's more than one nerve going to the tip of your finger, so if one has been cut, the others are still able to take over that function.
You're saying there's nothing you can take, you're asking if there's something you can take to
Well,
accelerate the
Yeah,
healing?
possibly.
Or
Mhm.
are you
Accelerate
referring
healing.
to nerves in the
What-
brain?
Well, no, I mean, I have an errant nerve in my foot that drives me nuts with itching, and I
Oh.
want to deal with that nerve.
Yeah, I don't know what's triggering that. I'm not a nerve doctor, and I assume you've talked to medical specialists on that.
Yeah, they say it's a nerve, that's, you
And they
know,
don't have
yeah, don't have a solution.
yeah,
Did you say it takes how, 1 centimeter
Sorry.
per month.
per month?
That's the regrowth rate of peripheral nerves.
But one thing that would be interesting is there's something that can enhance that growth rate.
Say
I don't
again.
know. I'm just wondering if there's anything that can enhance that growth rate.
Well, I do know that for
Exercise,
people
maybe,
with spinal cord injury, they're now testing, putting certain chemicals where the spinal cord has been severed, and those chemicals promote the rejoining, which without those chemicals, usually it'll just die back and the person will be paralyzed for life.
What kind of chemical, do you know the name?
They're being tested in surgical, in spinal cord surgery wards, so you can look that up.
Haven't stem cells also been suspected to be helpful in regeneration?
Well, on peripheral nerve, the bodies of the cells are all in the spinal cord. And so you can have a nerve with a process that's 3 or 4 feet long going to your toes. And the cell body is not in your toes, it's all in the spinal cord. So if the peripheral nerve is cut right here, you need to either wait or have some treatment that will help it grow back into the toes. On the other hand, if there's a severed nerve in the spine itself, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, spinal surgeons are testing some compounds that may help those two ends to rejoin, which is very exciting. It's
Is there a
just been in
particular
development.
school we should look at if we wanna, if I wanna help somebody with that condition, or refer someone?
You should,
Stanford, UCSF,
those are all good schools.
they're all doing that same kind of thing? Wow.
It's still early stage, but if you get a good doctor, he or she will know what's the latest.
Or AI will soon, know everything,
Yeah.
right? And we can just plug into AI and they'll tell us exactly what we need, right?
Oh, well, unless you accidentally plug into a Russian AI.
Consider the source, right?
Good
Consider the
point.
source, that's right.
Sometimes it's hard to know the source.
Yeah.
If the AI is good, it will be good at fooling you.
It's a very exciting part of medicine to have that.
So there's also growth factors in your blood, and some of the growth factors are going down as we get older over the decades, and some of the inflammatory factors are going up as we get older. And there have been experiments done first with mice where they took young mouse plasma, not the blood cells, but the liquid part of the blood, and injected it into older mice. And the older mice partially rejuvenated. And then they thought, well, is it all just young factors that are going down? So they took some plasma from an older mouse and injected it into younger mice, and they aged faster. So there's both good factors and bad factors in the blood plasma. And this is a very exciting area of research. And the scientists who are doing this work have graduated from mice to monkeys, and there's been a couple of clinical trials now at Stanford where they're actually taking people who have early stage Alzheimer's and either giving them young plasma factors or they're giving them albumin from young plasma. So there's a lot of curiosity about whether it's the growth factors or the albumin or something else, or the extracellular vesicles. And all of these things may contribute to the rejuvenating effect. And this is something that I'm very excited to learn more about, because as soon as I nailed it down, I'm gonna try getting it injected in myself. Because I think it's that valuable.
Yeah, I'd like to add from the conference that we went to, the conference that John and I went to, there was about 6 or so presentations on young plasma and what that could do, or old plasma and what that did. And it started by sewing mice together, an old and a young mouse together, and the old mouse got younger and the young mouse got older. But, you know, they ended up dying because that's not a healthy way for them to live, you know, on one
You know,
circular.
they died because they had to dissect them and see what happened to their organs.
And some died anyway,
Yeah.
because I listened to that
Yeah.
presentation, and they were very sad about it. So they ended up deciding to do the injections instead. And John, networker that you are, you know, you introduced me to a man in Woodside who may be starting a whole company on this.
Yes.
And he was also taking into account the problems that happened when, largely with pregnant women who got this plasma, you know, and they already have too much blood and plasma in their system because they're trying to nourish a baby, that they had significant problems come up. But he's looking to take some plasma out and then put fresh young plasma in. So it's all fascinating, and John and I are kind of keeping a beady eye on this kind of stuff to see what we may want to experiment with. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Do not do Keith Richards plasma.
What?
I said stay on the leading edge of
A
it.
beady eye, yes.
So I hear people talking about Keith Richards again.
We're saying, whatever you do, just don't do Keith Richards plasma.
Oh, yes, exactly.
No, that's not very young. In fact, some people think that the younger the better, and they're obtaining umbilical cord plasma, which you can't get much younger than that.
There you go.
But that's much harder to get because there's only 100 cc's in an umbilical cord.
John, could you talk for just a minute about any cultures around the world that have very robust longevity?
Yes, I can.
And if there are some basic lifestyle factors or some prominent features that are suspected from those cultures that contribute to their longevity.
Sure, I'll say a few words about that, and if people want to know more, there's a book that was written on the subject called The Blue Zones
The blue zones.
by Dan Buettner. And so he went around the world, he found 4 populations that seemed to have much longer than typical lifespans. And one of them was in Sicily, one was in Okinawa, one was in Loma Linda, California.
Loma Linda?
Yeah, with
Yeah.
the Adventists.
Seventh-day Adventists who have a very healthy lifestyle. And was the 4th one in Central America, do you remember, Paul?
Yeah, Central America, and then there's one in Greece and one in Italy.
Yeah, Santorini.
Yeah, the Italy one, yeah, that's right.
Not Italy, it's actually Santorini.
So what was the commonality between those cultures that was,
So, a couple of commonalities. One is that the older people are respected members of the community, and the community is very cohesive, and they ask for advice, and they feel included, and they don't get depressed because they're an active part of the community.
Right.
But another thing is physical activity. Most of these regions have a lot of need for farming, and they're active every day, sometimes walking up the mountainside to their farm patch and then walking down the mountainside at the end of the day to their home where they cook and build a fire and all of these things.
how about elevation? There was a rumor at one point that people living at high elevations with perhaps thinner air seem to live longer.
Several of them are at high elevations, but the Okinawans are close to the seashore and they
Okay.
catch fish. And their diet is mostly vegetables. Many of them are not eating a lot, so they're not overweight.
So low caloric intake.
Yeah, or once a day feeding. This keeps sliding down.
One meal a day.
And do they say when?
It doesn't matter that much. The important thing is the period of time between meals.
It's the long
16
fasting.
hours.
It's the daily
Yeah,
fasting, which is,
and as Tim Ferriss likes to
Beneficial.
say, you're allowed one cheat day a week. And I don't know if you know Tim Ferriss, he wrote a book called The 4-Hour Work Week, and then he wrote a book called The 4-Hour Body, which has a lot of good suggestions in it.
4-hour body?
Yeah,
Huh.
that's just his trademark now. He's got the 4-Hour Cook and the 4-Hour Body and the 4-Hour Work Week.
No.
And it pushes collagen. What about pollution in these areas?
Pollution is quite low in all of these areas. But I want to say something about Okinawa. So these people that are over 100 years old now, they underwent a lot of deprivation during World War II when they were in their younger developmental years. And they were eating mainly food out of their own garden plots, like purple sweet potatoes and fish that they could catch locally. And the fish are very high in omega-3 fatty acids. But the important thing is that Okinawa is a U.S. territory. And in the last 20 or 30 years, McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken have moved in. And the grandchildren of these 100-year-old centenarians are in worse shape than their grandparents.
Yeah.
They're playing video games and sitting around and watching TV and eating McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and their arteries are getting clogged and they're obese and they're doing much worse than their grandparents. So there's it's definitely not just genetic. Although these populations do have some healthy genes that are being studied by Nir Barzilai at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx, and also being studied by a couple of other research groups in Italy and Denmark and Norway.
Do these results correlate with what Weston Price found in the Nourishing Traditions and Sally Fallon and that whole?
I don't know what you're talking about. Do you want to expound upon
Sally
it?
Fallon.
Just for a moment, he was the inventor of orthodontics. He was a dentist, and he went around the world taking pictures of people's teeth, and then he wrote down the diets, and he tried to find people who'd been eating the same food for 1,000 years. And then he found these generational shifts where people went to what he called the missionary diet with the refined foods, and how that changed the shape of their teeth, and how the people with really good teeth had almost no illness and lived, healthy till they died, and all these other criteria. So the Weston A. Price Foundation, the book is called Nourishing Traditions. Sally put 1,000 indigenous recipes. All the recipes in there are 1,000 years old.
nourishing.
And then she did a lot of analysis of the studies of like the Cambridge diet and all these other things, and puts holes in all of them and talks about.
What's the book again? I'm sorry,
It's
Nourishing?
called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon.
And a lot of the things that you'll find in nourishing traditions fly in the face of all the information that's coming out now about diets and so forth. And so, you have to be kind of a believer, to because it's fairly meat heavy and.
Which one?
The nourishing traditions.
Well, what he found was that indigenous people have about a 10% complex fat diet. Even if they have all the vegetables they need, they still, particularly for the women who are going to have babies, they provide them with complex if they don't have animal fat, they have insects or something like that. And he went all over the world, and then he was a Seventh-day Adventist, so he was a vegetarian, so he was looking for vegetarian culture, and at the end of his life, he published an article called Dr. Price's Disappointment, where he had to acknowledge that as a scientist, he couldn't find anyone anywhere in the world, any indigenous culture that's eating the same thing for 1,000 years that were vegetarians. They all had 10% meat, or they supplemented with insects.
Probably if you're gonna eat meat, the healthiest meat is a cold water fish such as salmon, because that's high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are good for your brain. And you probably don't want to eat a lot of saturated fats. And the Mediterranean diet uses olive oil, which is quite healthy. Another vegetarian source of omega-3 fatty acids is flax oil. So healthy fats are good for you. And the one thing that we learned at this conference this week is some of the experiments with mice and experimental animals was that too much protein shortens their life. Protein restriction is important.
What's all the fuss about keto diet and that whole thing? I mean, there's a whole new trend about just having more meats and fats, right?
I'm not a believer in it. There are a few that are very rabid believers, but I'm not.
Even in the keto movement, there's a sort of growing group that you need to have low to moderate amount of protein. You know, a lot of fat in the keto movement, but not huge amounts of protein. They're recognizing that, just what you're saying about excess protein being a problem.
Yeah.
But they also know they need it, like my friend Scott Spann is in ketosis most of the time, but he plays world-class handball, so he goes in and has these huge exercise bursts, and so he'll load up on proteins before he goes and does all that exercise, but otherwise he stays in ketosis.
Okay, well, I don't endorse that.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I just want to say that our solutions are going to be somewhat individual to us, okay? And for example, I highly recommend, and I suggest in your packet, I gave you an example of the life extension cheek swab genetic results of somebody. Their name is blacked out. And you know, the reason why I picked this particular one and recommend getting your APOE test through life extension rather than 23andMe is they give really quality recommendations on supplements. Now, for myself, I have one APOE4 and one APOE2. And for example, if I take a significant amount of saturated fats, it shows up everywhere in my blood variables, which I also test for. For instance, I didn't like non-fat yogurt or low-fat yogurt. I didn't like it. So I bought whole milk yogurt and was having a grand old time with it. Well, it showed up right away on my lipid panel, you know, so I'm just letting you know that everybody's different. Someone else could eat whole milk yogurt and get away with it. All right? And yeah, you want to say something?
Well, I have a question for you. I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought.
Okay.
Well, how long after you started the whole milk yogurt did the LDL spike?
Well, I didn't keep on retesting, but I did about 6 months worth.
Okay.
And bam, bam, there it was. And you know, when I stop doing that, it goes down again. Okay? So again, I want to let you know, you are the explorer of the terrain of your own body. Okay? You can learn from other people and come up with possibilities. But this is why I want to empower you with how to do research on yourself.
Very good.
Inexpensively,
Yes, good.
you know, so that you become the decider and the doctors become your consultants. And you become your own best physician, and you know your body. If you study your body, you know your body better than anybody, okay? And you're gonna put more time into studying your conditions, if you have one, then the average doctor, for sure, the doctor in Kaiser sees you for 15 to 30 minutes. But even some of these more holistic doctors, they see one patient after another. It's hard to make a living with medicine, frankly. So I just wanted to encourage you to help out the doctors as well as yourself. You know, by learning how to look at yourself and study yourself and doing quality research. So what I just wanted to say, if you go to the section on the APOE genetic analysis report, you will see very valuable ways of enhancing your omega-3s, enhancing and supporting your memory. There's something called pycnogenol, which reduces inflammation in your brain cells. And you can also learn to study just how inflamed am I, okay? And you can do a test for C-reactive protein, and you can understand, oh my gosh, I'm inflamed, you know? And you don't have to go sit with a doctor, you know? You can understand yourself and track yourself. all
You're
right?
saying through life extension they'll do all that?
Well, they have the complete lab core, all the tests available that any doctor could order and at cheaper prices. Way cheaper prices, and they run sales twice a year. And I got some tests for Paul and myself at 1/3 of the price of LabCorp. Now, Medicare will pay for some things for those of you who are over 65, but it doesn't. It just is part of rescue medicine. They don't pay for explorative things to help you understand yourself. No, you're going to have to come up with it. But you can say, is my health an investment in myself? Another thing that I think is important to know, and I mean, I do see doctors, I don't do just myself. But for instance, we live in a toxic environment, I'm sorry to say. We have not only glyphosate, we have toxic metals, all right? And I recently tested my metals, and I've done 24 calcium EDTA IV pushes at another time, and I kept on seeing that I was refreshing my lead and cadmium. Well, I have to let you know, and that's related to blood pressure, and I have some issues with blood pressure. So, I am now on an exploration to get that tea that I drink tested, because it's grown in China, and what is true is when you get organic chocolate or organic tea, you know, or organic coffee, if you're drinking something that's grown in a polluted environment with air and water that are not at your top level, you're going to get pollution in what you drink, okay? So I'm just saying, we also have to look at the quality of the farm that we eat things from. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just at an event with Pesticide Action Network.
Yeah.
Who spoke about how a lot of the, the big companies, the US ag companies are now moving to Hawaii because it's a 4-season, environment for them to grow, growing season. And that the schools in Hawaii are now creating a 1-mile buffer.
Some successfully.
Some of them successfully, but on the other hand, the wind can decide the wind does not know when they're at that 1 mile.
Mhm.
So, you just realize there's no such thing really anymore as having a pure environment. It's so
Right.
terrible.
And I have a place in Maui that's very far away from the Monsanto fields, which could be considered the jewel in the cave of the dragon, all right? And Monsanto has a claw grip on the university. They don't teach anything else. But anyway, so I want to let you know that your best test for checking glyphosate, because I ran tests in Maui and in California with Microbenetech, which was recommended to me, but your best check to see how much Roundup you have in your body, which you all do, I promise you.
Yeah.
You are peeing and urinating out Roundup every day as we speak, okay? But if you want to know how much Roundup do I have in me, you go to a doctor who orders the Great Beginnings lab, where you get an IV of glutathione, and you urinate out and capture your urine for 6 hours afterwards, and you will get an accurate Roundup score.
It's called Great Beginnings.
Glyphosate. Yeah, but you probably will have to go through a doctor for this. But I just needed to bring up this topic of our toxic environment.
Yeah.
You know, we're not living, you know, like in the early 1900s, you know, before World War II, when people grew everything organically. And let's remember that pesticides and herbicides came out of the nerve toxins that were used in World War II.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of them.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just had to mention that. 'cause
Great,
it's
great
important.
beginnings?
What?
Great beginnings?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a great lab.
Are you talking about the same lab that I use, Lori?
Yeah.
It's not Great Beginnings, and I care, it's great something, but it's not Great Beginnings.
Good beginnings.
No,
Well, you guys can figure it out, and
Well,
we'll
I
tell
can't,
people
I
at the
can't
end.
think
It
right now,
definitely
but
has
it's,
beginnings in it.
You guys can work that out.
Yes, all right, but I just,
Deal with it
I
at the
needed
end of
to
the talk.
mention this, to get your appropriate glyphosate testing. And Monsanto killed a number of labs in the United States who are doing more accurate Roundup testing, okay?
And what do you do if you have it? I mean, if you,
You can take clinoptilolite, and that can help take it out, which is a form of zeolite. And
how do you spell that?
clinoptilolite is CLINOPTILITE. It's a form of zeolite, and it's a cage that carries away the chemical within the cage. You also, I recommend getting a reverse osmosis filter so that you can take out some of your fluoride, which is added here, right, Marin? And also Roundup, some, not all.
Wow,
Yeah, all right.
thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
So, if you don't want to buy a reverse osmosis filter, Safeway often has a blue machine called Glacier Water. You bring your own empty jug and fill it up for 35 cents, and that has reverse osmosis water in it.
Good to know.
Yeah, so you don't pollute the world with more empty bottles. I've seen some people, they just buy cases and cases of bottled water in plastic bottles. That's probably,
For the ethylate, which is a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
so, yeah, Glacier Water is a good company, and it's in most Safeways. Okay, most of you have had biology in high school, I assume, so I don't really need to explain this. But when I was talking about the nucleus and the DNA is in the center, and then the mitochondrion is the energy center that I was talking about here, and the lysosome is the recycling center that I was talking about. So this is a cartoon of a cell. It's not an accurate picture, but it shows you in cartoon form the different structures of the cell. And then outside the cell is the collagen and extracellular matrix, which has all of these fibers that are holding things together. And there are these specialized cells that maintain the fiber network, and they're called fibroblasts. And I have a hypothesis that if we could make our fibroblasts more effective, they would do a better job at keeping our collagen healthy. And that's a research project that I've started to work on at UC Berkeley and hope to continue in the future.
So what's your initial prognosis? How can you do that? Is that related to exercise, or is that
Exercise is very good, and that's one approach. I'm also looking at whether there might be a way to take some of your fibroblasts out and treat them in a test tube and then put them back in. But that's not yet available. That's just a research project. So what are some of the prospects and promising goals? The lysosomes and autophagy and non-dividing cells, which I talked about, perhaps there are ways to improve the recycling of damaged proteins. So the reason that you need a recycling center is just like there's amyloid beta in the spaces between the cells in the brain, there are misfolded proteins inside the cytoplasm, and this process digests them all, turns them back into amino acids so that the cell can use them again. And this ties in with the fasting and partial day fasting, because if you're feeding your body every few hours, it will never recycle those misfolded proteins because it says, oh, I've got new food, I don't need to recycle anything. But if you make yourself hungry by going for 15, 16, 17, 20 hours without eating, your body says, oh, there's no food. Oh, I guess I'll just digest these misfolded proteins and turn them back into amino acids and use them to make the proteins I need. And the same thing with oxidized fats, particularly membrane fats. That the cell is surrounded by a membrane, the mitochondria is surrounded by a membrane, the endoplasmic reticulum is surrounded by a membrane, the lysosome itself is surrounded by a membrane, and the nucleus is surrounded by a membrane. And reactive oxygen species, what we sometimes call free radicals, they will oxidize the fat in the membrane. The membrane's made out of fats formed into a thin sheet. And the oxidized fats do not fold properly, they're not the right flexibility, and they can actually spread oxidation from one molecule to the next in a lipid peroxide chain reaction. So by fasting, we get the recycling apparatus to digest up more of the oxidized fats as well as the misfolded proteins, and then the body makes fresh ones that are healthy.
So John, are you, am I calling you John, I'm sorry, doctor? What do you prefer to be called?
Well, I have a master's degree, so you can call me master. That's it.
There you go, great. So are you doing partial fasting yourself?
In most days, I skip 2 meals and just eat one. But then when I do eat, I don't count calories. I eat as much as my body says I need, although I don't eat bad foods like Coca-Cola. And
So will that meal be a lunch or a dinner, or do you have a?
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, so
You
just.
can eat breakfast every day and skip lunch and dinner. You can eat dinner
Right.
every day. I find that I sleep better if I don't eat right before I go to bed.
Is there any downside that you have seen from the research? Because it seems like this partial fasting thing has only been in the last 5 years I've been hearing about it.
Well, some people did it and they didn't know what to call it. I mean,
Right.
Our ancestors 5,000 years ago probably didn't cook 3 times a day.
Definitely not.
Right.
So partial day fat, when I was younger, it was just, oh, I'm too busy to cook.
Right. So
But-
is there a downside?
No,
Oh, no.
Do you go to bed hungry sometimes?
sometimes.
Interesting.
You can drink water, right?
You can
Yeah.
drink water, you can drink
Tea.
black coffee and black tea, but no sweeteners and no cream,
Including stevia.
including stevia. It turns out that there, and I think Lori might have heard this in the talks this weekend, that at least in the small experimental animals, not only does feeding them a lot shorten their lifespan, but giving them artificial sweeteners shortens their lifespan. And it's not that the artificial sweeteners are toxic so much as the artificial sweeteners trick the body into thinking it's real sweeteners, and it activates the same neural pathways as real sweeteners and shortens their lifespan. So
Wow.
an artificial sweetener doesn't have to be a poison to be affecting the fact that it no longer thinks you're fasting. So maybe if you have artificial sweeteners with your meal, there's no problem at all. But if you're trying to do a partial day fast and you have an artificial sweetener in your black tea
Which
or
is
your
not,
black,
I don't consider stevia artificial, I consider it natural. And I grow the plant
I'm
myself.
sorry, I am using the wrong words for Lori.
Yeah.
You don't want any sweeteners that your body would interpret as being sweet.
So that would include stevia, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
If
So-
you're trying to fast, taking stevia
You're
breaks
giving it
your
the wrong
fast,
signal.
taking sugar breaks your fast, taking honey breaks your
And
fast.
interesting enough, Food Addicts Anonymous knows
Still
this.
stimulates the same response.
I'd like to,
Exactly.
She will
And
cut
now
it.
Lori's going
Now
to
we have
present
a
the
debate.
opposite
no, I
position.
also want to say,
She's
I did
doing
a
it.
quick research
Wait a
on the
minute.
lab, and I had mixed up the words. It's Great Plains Laboratory,
Great.
and the name of their nutritional product is New Beginnings, all right? So I kind of mixed everything into great. I want to say that right now I've lost about 4 pounds on the HCG diet, which I chose to do. And I do want to say the stevia sweetened tea helps me. And I don't crave any kind of sweetness beyond that.
What is HCG? I'm sorry, I've never heard.
Well, it's, some people don't like believe in it, but I happen to get the results from it. Human chorionic gonadotropin, it's an injection. And I find it's very helpful for weight loss. I haven't tried to lose weight for about 10 years, but when I was overdoing myself trying to get my place in Hawaii up and running as a good business, working 12 to 14 hours a day, I'd do comfort stuff like chai tea lattes from Starbucks and everything, and I just pushed up, my weight. So, but I just want to say for me, the stevia works really well. And
Well,
it
it's
was
no problem
satisfying.
if you're not fasting. If you have it during a meal, or if you're having a latte with cream and everything, it's better to have cream
Well, if I
instead.
had it with cream, but I don't. But
But
anyway, I'm
it
just saying
breaks
it's
your
useful
fast.
for me.
It
And
breaks
I've
your
watched myself crave some carbohydrate with tea, like a cookie or this or that, if I don't use stevia. So for me, it's useful in a different way.
Yeah, but it's not fasting. It stops you. It
Yeah.
stops your fasting
Yeah.
condition.
But luckily, I sleep a long time and I don't eat breakfast, so.
Oh, yeah. If you sleep 18 hours a day, you've got your automatic.
No, I don't. I don't eat after 7.
I'm teasing.
And I don't
I'm
have any
teasing.
breakfast, so it works.
So
Okay?
John, you couldn't eat a watermelon and be fasting?
No.
Hecklers, okay.
So,
I would say something. I watched a great TED Talk on this morning
Oh,
concerning intermittent fasting.
you want to stand up and talk to the camera?
No?
Okay.
And essentially, I've been doing this for about 5 years.
Mhm.
And this woman said you have to work into it, but optimum would be a 16-hour fast.
Yeah.
Now, some people do daily. That doesn't work for me. But if
Mhm.
you went from 4 in the afternoon to 8 in the morning, that's 16 hours.
Yeah. Mhm.
And this article, and the speaker was eloquent and went into all the benefits.
What was her
of
name?
it.
Do you remember?
No, but if you just do a Google on
Yeah.
intermittent fasting, you'll get tons of information.
And I think your topic about reusing the misfolded proteins is fascinating. And I really appreciate that you brought that up.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it sounds like the partial day fasting is potentially an essential element for weight loss.
It's very helpful in weight loss.
And for other things too,
Yeah.
for
So is
cleansing,
exercise.
rebalancing your body, everything.
How's the inflammation too?
But as Tim Ferriss says in 4 Hour Body, we lose weight in the kitchen, we build muscle in the gym. You can't
Right.
exercise your way to losing weight because it just makes you hungry.
That's true, yeah.
I'm not sure, but I've, the last 6 months, I've been in a steam room, doing a gua sha on my skin. And I've been like scraping my skin, my whole, every part of my body. And my whole internal biome is shifting. I didn't do it for 2 weeks because I was on a trip. And I felt my whole body like going, and I kind of have concluded that I'm lowering the toxic load on my digestive system because I'm scraping the skin or something. But anyway, so it's quite profound. It's been about 6 or 7 months now.
Did you saunas with this?
I'm in the steam
Oh,
room at
yeah.
Self-Care. I do a
Well,
dry
that makes
sauna.
you excrete it also.
So I'm
That's
upside
toxic
down
metal.
and then just scraping with this Chinese little piece of wood thing that you scrape your skin with.
So you hang by your ankles?
No, I just lie on my back and I keep my
Oh, you're not
feet up
upside
in the
down.
air. Well, I'm inverted,
Okay.
so I'm, because you're scraping down toward your heart. But
Okay,
anyway, it's just
let's
been,
get back to aging.
How interesting.
well, I'm gonna be 65 in a month, so.
Yeah, that sounds useful as a detox.
Promising goals, targets for intervention.
So if I
Tell
could
us about it,
interject.
John.
Yeah, how do we
have
get
this
intracellular turnover?
Yeah.
Okay, so enhancing intracellular turnover is the lysosomal pathway that I was talking about, and the best way is the partial day. Well, some people will fast for more than a day. I know a couple of people that do a 24, 36-hour fast once a month, or even a 48-hour fast twice a year. But that can be extreme for some people, so as Lori said earlier, we all have to pay attention to our own individual situations. Telomeres are something that has been in the news a lot. They're parts of the chromosome that get eroded away with advancing age, and there is research going on to find ways to rebuild the telomeres. And so at the moment, the other thing that helps telomeres is reducing psychological stress. The University of California at San Francisco did some studies of caregivers of family members with Alzheimer's or caregivers of family members with childhood illnesses, and their telomeres were shorter because they were under constant psychological stress. So if you're under stress, A, learn to deal with it, and B, try to change your situation.
Right. You can get them tested, is what you're saying? You can test your telomeres?
There's no real good test that's available to the public. There's one under development at University of Texas, Jerry Shay's lab, S-H-A-Y. He has a test that's just becoming available, I think only for researchers, but maybe for us as well. And his test is called TESLA, Tesla. The TE stands for telomere, and the L stands for length, and A stands for analysis. So if you do the right thing, you don't really need to test it. And the test, it's hard to see a difference in less than 5 years.
Wow.
You know, most of the telomere tests are just looking at blood cells, and
But we know that stress is really the enemy in many ways. It seems to shorten lives everywhere.
Exactly, yes,
Right.
thank you. The nuclear envelope is something that's still in the research stage, but it's involved in certain rare diseases that cause young children to age a whole lifetime in 12 years.
Progeria, right?
Yeah, progeria, which means early gerontology. Epigenetic controls. The DNA inside our cells has a DNA sequence, which we call genetics, but then it also has methylation and acetylation on top of the DNA that can turn on and off different genes, which is why as the fertilized egg divides, certain parts of it become skin and certain parts of the progeny of this cell becomes nerves or muscle, or heart muscle, or brain cells. All of these different cell types come from the same set of genes, but certain genes are turned on and certain genes are turned off. And epigenetics is what turns them on and off. And epigenetics does tend to get a little bit out of control in older people. So there's early stage research looking at what governs the epigenetic controls, and it looks like possibly this young plasma or extracellular vesicle treatment may be helpful in resetting the epigenetic clock. Gene editing is much more controversial and much earlier stage. Only, I think, a few babies have been edited in terms of germline editing, and this was done in China last year and received a lot of blowback. But there's also non-germline gene editing. If you have a genetic disease, you can perhaps with some technology called CRISPR fix the broken gene that you have without changing the sperm and the egg, just the damaged tissue. So that this has got a lot of promise, and it's just a very early stage now. Extracellular matrix repair, as I mentioned, there is this experimental compound called allegibrium or ALT-711 that can help to take the sugar, the glycation, off of the collagen and reduce inflammation and reduce the cross-links.
We can order that from you, is that right? Or something?
We can talk about it after the presentation.
Okay.
I have experimental supplies that I can make available to experimenters, but it's not an approved FDA drug.
Okay, thanks.
Did I go too far? So, I think I've covered all of these factors except maybe the last 2 points. One is that, as Lori said, we want to test ourselves to find out if we're making progress. And these tests are sometimes called biomarkers of aging. The other thing that I just learned about this recently is that there are some genes that jump around in our genome. They were called jumping genes by Barbara McClintock, who discovered them in, back at Cold Spring Harbor 80 years ago, and she won the Nobel Prize for this. And I believe Laurie's family is involved with funding Cold Spring Harbor. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What is Cold Spring Harbor?
It's a national resource. It's a genetic research lab in Long Island, New York, and it's been around for about 100 years or close to it. And they
Cool.
do top-of-the-line research,
Thank you.
mostly funded by the National Institutes on Health, and also for private foundations, including some foundation that Laurie's parents set up. So these jumping genes are also present in the human genome, and this wasn't really appreciated until recently. This most serious one is called the LINE1 transposon, and in advanced age, it doesn't just sit tight in the genome, but it jumps from one area of the DNA to another, and it can cause mutations, and the mutations can be very harmful. So these transposons jump around by a process called retrotranscription, and that's very similar to the way that the HIV virus jumps around. So there's some early stage research looking at whether antiretroviral drugs that have been developed to treat HIV may actually treat aging as well, which is very exciting and very recent news. Brown University is spearheading this.
At what age do you think get jumping genes generally?
Age 1,
40?
age 2, age 3.
Oh, I thought you said when they're older.
It gets worse.
Oh, I see, it could be any time.
It could be any time.
Wow.
But it just increases much more with greater age.
John, how about meditation? Have they done tests, studies on meditation affecting longevity?
Oh, yeah. As I mentioned earlier, meditation and calm mind help to keep the telomeres longer. So that's a good example of how meditation, which I have here on the chart, affects the telomeres, which is up here on the chart. And it also is good for your hormonal balance. If you're always stressed, you've got stress hormones in your blood all the time, that can cause more damage to your internal organs as well. So I think this is a repeat of an earlier one, except that for epigenetic tests, I don't think LEF has those, but there's a company called Zymo, and Johnny Adams with the Aging Intervention Foundation has a way to sign you up for Zymo epigenetic clock testing. Is that right?
Under specific conditions, although they have the
Stand up.
company. Yeah, it would depend, we'd have to talk, but they do have a company they spun out called Epimorphy, and their test is a fee-for-service available at mydnage.com. mydnage.com.
DNA gene,
DNH.
mydnage.com.
And can you say, it's a test, so it's, once you take the test, they then make recommendations, or?
Oh, well,
It's for research.
it evaluates your epigenome, and specifically it distills the analysis into a number, an epigenetic age, which is, in my humble estimation, among the many biomarker or lab tests you can take, the most important one that you could use. If I had to choose only one, it would be that. Fortunately, we don't. We have multiple tests.
is that the DNA methylation?
Yes, exactly.
Huh. And that's, I was trying to write down the correct website, mydnaging.com.
Age.
mydnage.com.
Oh, okay, so I had a little off.
Although, well, we'll talk later.
Yeah, we can definitely cover this thing
Yeah.
later. But the advantage of assessing your biomarker or DNA clock or aging biomarkers is if you're doing some experimental things, you can go back a year later and see if they did any good.
Yes.
And if they didn't do any good, you can stop wasting money on them.
Your baseline.
And if they did do some good, then maybe you can tell the world. So for other chemicals, as Lori has already said several times, LabCorp is one of the standard labs, and Life Extension Foundation in Florida has made a deal so that members can get their other blood parameters tested for a great discount. Although if you're on an insurance plan and you're doing your annual physicals, sometimes that's already included. Let's see, crosslinks, okay, I talked about that several times. This is just a picture of the collagen surrounding the aorta. So if your collagen in the large blood vessel leading out of your heart is cross-linked, it's no longer possible. So your artery in a young person, every time your heart squeezes, it sends a pressure wave through all of your blood vessels. And you probably have seen the pulse in the neck or the wrist. So there's this pressure wave, and the elastic blood vessels act like shock absorbers, which is good. And when the collagen is cross-linked, it acts like a steel pipe. And this means every time the heart squeezes, two bad things happen. One is that there's no shock absorber, and now you've got this pounding high blood pressure going into your brain and can cause aneurysms and strokes. And that is not good. And the other bad thing is that the heart is pushing without a shock absorber, and it stiffens the heart more due to back pressure. And when the heart is stiffer, it can't relax fast enough to refill properly, and this is called diastolic heart failure. The heart pumps, but it doesn't have time to refill. And diastolic heart failure means that you have trouble walking across the room and things like that. This is
Is your
just-
point to get it tested?
I'm sorry?
Is your point to make sure you're getting that tested?
No, I changed subjects.
Okay, sorry.
We're not talking about testing anymore, we're talking about the cross-link breakers.
Okay.
And this is just a diagram of molecules involved in cross-link formation and some of the
Wow.
pathways involved in cross-links. They're too detailed to go on this. Lori had asked about telomeres earlier, and I mentioned, you can see that on average, telomere length is less in old people than in young people, but also notice that this 90-year-old has longer telomeres than this 67-year-old. So, in terms of looking at telomere data, what you really care about is not on this chart. What you really care about is the length of the shortest telomere in your cell, not the average length. And that's where this Texas test called TESLA is able to measure the shortest telomere in your cell and not the average one. That's why all of the other telomere tests are not worth taking.
Have you had yours tested?
No, but I hope to soon.
Yeah.
I've tested mine with life length twice,
Yeah,
and I have to say, when I was working to stop our presidential election from being stolen.
no politics, next
Anyway,
subject.
no, I'm just saying, my telomere life length was 10 years older than my age.
Hmm.
And so
Okay.
I hope that it's gone back down.
No, I
Well-
think the stress of the times
Yeah.
is
Stress,
terrible.
basically, I'm affirming what you said.
Right, but I think you should only rely on the Tesla test, not the life.
Uh-huh, okay.
This is just a picture of a telomere, which you can get out of one of the journal articles. So I've already talked about parallel pathways. You could totally cure this pathway and do a lot of good, but if you don't also deal with this pathway, you're not going to completely rejuvenate yourself. So it's more than one thing, although they're somewhat related. So there's probably not 500 things. There's probably half a dozen things that if you treat, will be able to substantially rejuvenate your cells and your extracellular matrix sufficiently to keep you healthier in older age. And that's really what we want.
Do you have a chart like that that shows just the simplified pathways to
No, but
focus on?
I'm planning to do that, but I haven't, I mean, it takes time to do all of these things.
That
And I
would be
think
interesting. It's
very-
hard for a layperson
Yeah,
to really comprehend this in a meaningful way. It's pretty overwhelming. So if there was a simplified chart, that might be more beneficial.
there are some other professors who've made simplified charts. One is sens.org, SENS.org, and that foundation has come up with a list of 7 broad categories
Oh, interesting.
called the 7 deadly things. And, their scientific director, Aubrey de Grey, has written a book on aging. So that's written at a level that's easier to understand, although it's
Aubrey,
A-U-B-R-E-Y is his first name. De Grey, D-E-G-R-E-Y is his last name.
great, thanks.
That
Good.
book is now 8 years old, so it's not completely up to date, but
Okay.
it gives you the basics. So I was talking about these senescent cells that are very highly inflammatory and increase with age. And there's been some research that was spearheaded at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And they found several compounds that kill off these bad inflammatory cells, leaving the rest of the cells in much better condition. And the combination that's been tested the most is dasatinib and quercetin in particular doses, which I can talk about with you guys individually. But anyway, this combination kills off a certain amount of the senescent cells, but you only want to do it once a year. This is not a daily regimen, because if you try to take this every day of your life, you're going to reduce your ability to recover from injuries and things like that. And there's another company that's in the research stage called Osun Biotechnology, and they have a way of temporarily activating suicide genes in the senescent cells, and then after you temporarily activated them, the stuff goes away, and so that's another way of giving a pulsatile killing off of the senescent cells, but not doing it every day of the year. Did I go the right? Rejuvenate stem cells. This is pretty preliminary research. This is a picture of somebody who's having their blood plasma changed. So
Wow.
you take out some of the old, well, she's not old, she's donating young plasma for us old guys.
She looks great.
Yeah. You've seen that. These are the mitochondria, and they get old and lose their ability to keep the cells healthy, and that's where the SS31 drug may be helpful. Exercise is helpful. Partial day fasting is helpful. So by increasing the turnover through the lysosome can digest the sick mitochondria so that the healthy mitochondria will replicate themselves. And so that's a good thing. This is something called lipofuscin, which clogs up the recycling apparatus. And that's something that we need to take care of. Exercise helps a little bit, and I'm also very interested in developing new drugs that will help to keep the lysosomes healthy. Autophagy feeds into the lysosome. This is like the garbage truck, and this is like the recycling center. And so autophagy could be enhanced by making the lysosomes healthier.
Are there alternatives besides exercise to clean, having if you're anti-farm, infrared sauna and stuff like that?
Not that I know of. I mean, I don't know everything,
Yeah.
but I haven't heard of infrared saunas doing anything for that. So we're gonna have to wrap up.